Sarah Martinez had been working at the Blackwater Defense Corporation for exactly 3 months, and in that time, she had perfected the art of being invisible. Every morning at 7:30, she would slip into the vast industrial cafeteria known as the mess hall, grab a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, and find the same corner table where she could eat in peace while reviewing technical manuals on her tablet. The other employees barely noticed her. To them, she was just another tech support worker, probably fresh out of college, trying to make her way in the male-dominated world of military contracting. She dressed simply in plain khakis and button-down shirts, kept her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and spoke only when spoken to. Her ID badge identified her as Sarah Martinez, IT Support, Level 2 clearance. What they didn't know was that Sarah Martinez was not her real name. The woman sitting quietly in the corner, methodically eating her breakfast while scrolling through what appeared to be computer repair manuals, was actually Captain Elena Vasquez, a decorated Special Forces operative on deep cover assignment. For the past 18 years, she had served in some of the most dangerous corners of the world, from the mountains of Afghanistan to the jungles of South America. She spoke 6 languages fluently, held black belts in 3 different martial arts, and could field strip an assault rifle blindfolded in under 90 seconds. But today, like every other day for the past 3 months, she was playing the role of shy, unremarkable Sarah from IT. The mission was delicate and required extreme patience. Blackwater Defense had been awarded a massive government contract to develop new surveillance technology, but intelligence suggested that classified information was being leaked to foreign agents. Elena's job was to infiltrate the company, blend in completely, and identify the source of the security breach. The challenge was that everyone was a potential suspect. From the janitors who had access to every office after hours, to the senior executives who handled the most sensitive projects, anyone could be the leak. Elena had to observe without being observed, gather intelligence without raising suspicion, and maintain her cover no matter what happened. This morning started like any other. Elena arrived at her usual time, collected her breakfast, and settled into her corner table. The mess hall was buzzing with the typical morning energy. Engineers discussed technical specifications over pancakes. Security guards complained about their overnight shifts, and administrative staff gossiped about office politics. Elena kept her eyes on her tablet, but her ears tuned to every conversation around her. In 3 months of careful observation, she had learned that the most valuable intelligence often came from casual conversations over coffee. People felt safe in the mess hall, away from their desks and supervisors, and they tended to speak more freely. Today, however, something felt different. Elena noticed immediately when Marcus Webb walked into the mess hall with his usual crew of followers. Webb was the head of physical security, a former Marine who had been discharged under circumstances that were suspiciously absent from his personnel file. He was exactly the type of person Elena would normally suspect of selling secrets. But 3 months of observation had revealed him to be more of a bully than a traitor. Webb had a particular talent for identifying the weakest members of the staff and making their lives miserable. He seemed to take special pleasure in intimidating the female employees, especially those who worked in technical positions. Elena had watched him reduce 2 different women to tears over minor infractions that he had blown completely out of proportion. For weeks, Elena had been waiting for Webb to notice her. She knew that her quiet, unassuming persona would eventually attract his attention, and she had been preparing for the confrontation. What she hadn't expected was for it to happen today, when she was in the middle of monitoring a particularly sensitive conversation between 2 engineers who might have information about the security leak. Webb approached her table with the confident swagger of someone who had never met real resistance. His 3 companions, all security guards who followed him around like loyal dogs, spread out slightly to form a loose semicircle around Elena's table. The subtle positioning was clearly intended to intimidate, to make her feel trapped and helpless. Well, Webb said loudly, his voice carrying across the nearby tables and causing conversations to pause. If it isn't our little computer mouse, hiding in her corner as usual, Elena looked up from her tablet with the expression of mild confusion that she had perfected over months of practice. "Excuse me?" she said softly, her voice carrying just the right note of nervousness. "You heard me, sweetheart," Webb continued, his tone becoming more aggressive. 3 months you've been sitting at this same table, eating the same boring breakfast, staring at that tablet like you're solving the mysteries of the universe. What's so important on that little screen of yours?" Elena could feel the attention of the entire mess hall focusing on their interaction. This was exactly the kind of scene she had hoped to avoid. Drawing attention was dangerous for someone in deep cover, but backing down too easily would also be suspicious. She had to play this exactly right. "Just work stuff," Elena replied, instinctively pulling the tablet closer to her chest, in a gesture that appeared protective, but actually served to hide the screen from Webb's view. "Computer manuals and technical specifications." "Computer manuals," Webb repeated mockingly, causing his friends to chuckle. "How exciting! You know what I think? I think you're one of those weird antisocial types who comes to work, does the bare minimum, and then goes home to her cats and her romance novels." Elena forced herself to look hurt by the comment, allowing a slight flush to creep up her neck. In reality, she was using the time to assess the tactical situation. Webb and his 3 companions had positioned themselves to block most escape routes from her table. But they had made the amateur mistake of leaving their backs exposed to the kitchen entrance. If this situation escalated, she had several options for neutralizing the threat, but using any of them would blow her cover immediately. "I don't have cats," Elena said quietly, playing into the role of someone who was too literal-minded to recognize an insult. This response seemed to frustrate Webb, who was clearly expecting her to either break down crying or get angry enough to provide him with an excuse to escalate the confrontation. Instead, he found himself dealing with someone who appeared to be completely missing the point of his harassment. "Listen here, Mouse," Webb said, leaning forward and placing both hands flat on Elena's table in a classic intimidation pose. "I don't like people who don't fit in. This is a team environment, and team players socialize with their coworkers. They don't sit alone in corners, hiding behind their little gadgets." Elena could smell the coffee on Webb's breath and see the small scar above his left eyebrow that suggested he had been in more than a few fights during his military career. Up close, she could also see that despite his aggressive posture, there was something almost desperate about his behavior. This wasn't just random bullying. Webb was trying to establish dominance in front of his followers, which suggested that his authority might be more fragile than it appeared. "I'm sorry," Elena said, making her voice even smaller. The innocent response seemed to infuriate Webb even more. He was clearly someone who fed on fear and anger, and Elena's apparent obliviousness was denying him the emotional reaction he craved. Around the mess hall, other employees were watching the confrontation with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Some seemed sympathetic to Elena's plight, while others appeared to be enjoying the show. "Your job," Webb said, his voice rising slightly, "is whatever I say it is. And right now, I'm saying that antisocial behavior is a security risk. People who don't integrate properly with their teams can't be trusted with sensitive information." This comment caught Elena's attention in a way that Webb couldn't possibly understand. The suggestion that antisocial behavior represented a security risk was exactly the kind of thinking that might be used to justify increased surveillance of certain employees. If Webb was involved in the security breach, he might be using accusations of antisocial behavior to deflect attention from his own activities. "I understand," Elena said, nodding earnestly. "Should I file a report about my antisocial behavior with HR? Or would you prefer to handle it through the security department?" The question was perfectly reasonable on the surface, but Elena knew it would put Webb in an awkward position. If he escalated the situation to an official complaint, he would have to justify his harassment of a employee who had done nothing wrong. If he backed down, he would lose face in front of his followers. Webb's face reddened as he realized he had been maneuvered into a corner by someone he had assumed was an easy target. "Don't get smart with me, Mouse," he said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I've dealt with plenty of smart-mouthed little girls who thought they were cleverer than they really were. Elena felt a familiar coldness settle over her. The same calm focus that had kept her alive through dozens of dangerous missions. Webb had just made a serious tactical error by revealing the personal nature of his hostility. This wasn't about security protocols or team integration. This was about his own insecurities and need to dominate women who he perceived as vulnerable. The problem was that Elena Vasquez was many things, but vulnerable was not one of them. Still maintaining her cover, Elena looked around the mess hall, as if suddenly aware that everyone was staring at them. "I'm sorry," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear clearly. "I don't understand what I did wrong. I come to work on time, I do my assignments, and I don't cause any problems. If there's something specific about my behavior that concerns you, maybe we should discuss it with my supervisor?" The suggestion was perfectly reasonable, which made Webb's aggressive behavior appear even more inappropriate by comparison. Elena could see several employees nodding in approval of her response, and she noticed that one of the senior engineers had pulled out his phone, possibly to document the confrontation. Webb realized he was losing control of the situation, but instead of backing down gracefully, he chose to double down on his aggressive approach. "Your supervisor doesn't work security," he said, straightening up but keeping his hands planted firmly on Elena's table. "I'm telling you right now that your behavior is suspicious, and suspicious behavior gets investigated." Elena nodded seriously, as if she was taking his threat completely at face value. "Okay," she said simply. "When should I report for this investigation?" The straightforward response clearly wasn't what Webb had expected. He had been trying to intimidate her into submission, or anger her into an outburst that would justify his harassment. Instead, he found himself dealing with someone who seemed to be treating his threats as legitimate security procedures. "Don't play games with me," Webb said, his frustration becoming more obvious. "I know your type. You think you're so much smarter than everyone else, sitting there with your little computer, probably thinking we're all a bunch of idiots." Elena tilted her head slightly, as if genuinely puzzled by his accusation. "I don't think anyone here is an idiot," she said carefully. "Everyone seems very professional and good at their jobs." The compliment seemed to confuse Webb even more. He had been building up to a confrontation based on the assumption that Elena looked down on her coworkers, but her response suggested exactly the opposite. Around the mess hall, Elena could see people whispering to each other, and she noticed that the general sentiment seemed to be turning against Webb. This was exactly the kind of situation Elena had been trained to exploit. By remaining calm and reasonable while her opponent became increasingly aggressive and irrational, she was allowing Webb to reveal his true character to everyone watching. If he was involved in the security breach, this public display of poor judgment and lack of self-control would be valuable intelligence about his psychological profile. Webb seemed to sense that he was losing the crowd, but his pride wouldn't let him back down gracefully. Instead, he decided to escalate the confrontation by reaching for Elena's tablet. "Let's see what's so important on this thing," he said, making a grab for the device. Elena's response was instantaneous and perfectly calculated. She pulled the tablet away from Webb's reaching hand with a quick, smooth motion that appeared to be nothing more than a startled reflex. To anyone watching, it looked like a nervous woman protecting her personal property from an aggressive bully. In reality, Elena had moved with the precision and timing of someone trained in close-quarters combat, positioning herself so that any further aggressive move from Webb would require him to overextend himself in a way that would give her multiple options for counterattack. "Please don't touch my work materials," Elena said, her voice carrying a slight tremor that sounded like fear but was actually controlled adrenaline. "I could get in trouble if unauthorized personnel access company equipment." The reference to unauthorized personnel was a subtle but pointed reminder that Webb had no legitimate authority to confiscate her tablet, and several people in the mess hall seemed to pick up on the implication. Elena could see nods of approval from nearby tables, and she noticed that the senior engineer with the phone had definitely started recording the confrontation. Webb's face turned an even deeper shade of red as he realized that his attempt to assert dominance had backfired spectacularly. Not only had the quiet girl from IT successfully defended her property, but she had done it in a way that made him look like an unreasonable bully who was overstepping his authority. The tension in the mess hall was becoming palpable. Webb's three companions looked uncomfortable, as if they were beginning to realize that their leader had picked a fight he couldn't win. Other employees had stopped even pretending to eat their breakfast and were openly watching the confrontation unfold. Elena knew that the next few moments would be critical. Webb was clearly feeling humiliated and desperate to regain control of the situation. Men like him often became most dangerous when they felt cornered, and Elena needed to be prepared for him to do something that would force her to abandon her carefully maintained cover. She just hoped she could resolve this situation without having to reveal exactly how special Sarah Martinez from IT really was. Webb stood frozen for a moment, his hand still extended toward Elena's tablet, clearly struggling with how to respond to being outmaneuvered by someone he had assumed would be an easy target. The silence in the mess hall stretched uncomfortably, as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Elena could see the calculation happening behind Webb's eyes. He was weighing his options, trying to find a way to save face without admitting that he had been wrong to harass her. The problem was that every option available to him would either make him look worse or require him to back down completely. Finally, Webb made his decision, and it was exactly the wrong one. "Stand up," he ordered, his voice loud enough to carry across the entire mess hall. "I said stand up, right now." Elena looked around nervously, as if seeking help from the other employees who were watching the confrontation. In reality, she was making sure that everyone could see what was happening and would remember that Webb was the aggressor in this situation. "I don't understand," Elena said, her voice small but clear enough for everyone to hear. "What did I do wrong? I'm just trying to eat my breakfast and review my work materials. I'll tell you what you did wrong," Webb said, leaning forward aggressively. "You've got an attitude problem, and you're about to learn what happens to people who don't show proper respect around here." Elena could see that several employees were now actively recording the confrontation with their phones. The senior engineer she had noticed earlier was holding his device openly, no longer trying to be discreet about documenting Webb's behavior. This was exactly what Elena had hoped would happen. By remaining calm and reasonable, while Webb became increasingly aggressive and unreasonable, she was ensuring that any escalation would be clearly documented as his fault. But Elena also knew that her cover identity had limits. Sarah Martinez from IT might be able to deflect verbal harassment with confused innocence, but if Webb actually became physically aggressive, she would have to respond in a way that might reveal her true capabilities. "Please," Elena said, injecting a note of genuine pleading into her voice. "I don't want any trouble. If you think I've done something wrong, can't we discuss it with my supervisor or HR?" The reasonable request seemed to infuriate Webb even more. He had clearly expected her to either cower in submission or lose her temper in a way that would justify his escalation. Instead, she kept responding like a rational adult who was trying to follow proper procedures. "I am discussing it," Webb said through gritted teeth. "I'm the head of physical security, which means I outrank your supervisor and half the people in HR. When I tell someone to stand up, they stand up." Elena nodded as if she was taking his claim of authority seriously, while mentally noting that Webb seemed to have an inflated sense of his own position in the company hierarchy. The head of physical security was certainly an important role, but it didn't give him unlimited power over other employees, especially in matters unrelated to actual security threats. "Okay," Elena said simply, and slowly rose from her chair. The movement was carefully calculated to appear reluctant and nervous, while actually positioning her in the optimal stance for defensive action if Webb tried to grab her or invade her personal space. To anyone watching, it looked like a timid woman reluctantly complying with an unreasonable demand from a workplace bully. Webb seemed satisfied that he had finally gotten her to obey a direct order, but Elena could see that he still hadn't figured out how to end this confrontation in a way that would salvage his reputation. He had successfully made her stand up, but now what? He couldn't exactly order her to apologize for the crime of eating breakfast alone, and he certainly couldn't justify searching her tablet or confiscating her property. "That's better," Webb said, though his voice lacked conviction. Now, I want you to explain to everyone here why you think you're too good to socialize with your coworkers. Elena blinked in apparent confusion. I don't think I'm too good to socialize, she said carefully. I just assumed that people came to the mess hall to eat, not necessarily to make conversation. I didn't realize there were specific social requirements for eating breakfast. Thank you for watching. I won relance with Refrit. On the market. The innocent response drew a few barely suppressed chuckles from nearby tables, and Elena could see that Webb noticed the reaction. His authority was being undermined not by defiance or anger, but by simple, logical questions that exposed the absurdity of his demands. Don't get cute with me, Webb warned, but his voice was losing some of its edge. Elena could see uncertainty creeping into his expression as he began to realize that this confrontation wasn't going the way he had planned. Around the mess hall, the mood was shifting perceptibly. What had started as uncomfortable entertainment was becoming something more serious. Elena could see employees whispering urgently to each other, and she noticed that someone near the entrance had left, probably to report the incident to management. Webb seemed to sense the change in atmosphere as well, because his next words carried a note of desperation. 3 months you've been working here, he said, and nobody knows anything about you. No friends, no social media presence that anyone can find, no personal information in casual conversation. That's not normal behavior for someone with nothing to hide. Elena felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Webb had just revealed that he had been conducting unauthorized surveillance on her background, which meant he was either paranoid enough to investigate every quiet employee, or he had specific reasons to be suspicious of her in particular. This changed everything. If Webb had been digging into her background, there was a chance he had discovered something that could compromise her cover. The identity of Sarah Martinez had been carefully constructed by intelligence professionals, but no cover identity was perfect, especially if someone with security clearance was actively investigating it. Elena knew she needed to respond to Webb's accusation in a way that would seem natural for Sarah Martinez, while also gathering intelligence about exactly how much he knew and why he had been investigating her. I don't understand, Elena said, allowing genuine concern to creep into her voice. Why would anyone need to research my background? I filled out all the required forms when I was hired. I passed the background check and got my security clearance. Background checks can be faked, Webb said, his confidence returning now that he felt he was back on solid ground. Social media profiles can be deleted. People can create false identities if they know what they're doing. Elena felt her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to maintain the confused expression of someone who had no idea why anyone would want to create a false identity. Why would someone do that? She asked innocently. What would be the point of lying about who you are? To get a job in IT support? It was a good question, and Elena could see that Webb didn't have a good answer for it. His suspicions seemed to be based more on paranoia than actual evidence, but paranoid people could sometimes stumble onto the truth by accident. Corporate espionage, Webb said, but his voice lacked conviction. Foreign agents. People who want to infiltrate defense contractors and steal classified information. Elena nodded seriously, as if she was learning something new and important. That sounds really dangerous, she said. If you think there might be foreign agents working here, shouldn't you report it to the FBI? Or someone like that? The suggestion clearly made Webb uncomfortable. Probably because he knew his suspicions were based on nothing more than the fact that Elena kept to herself and didn't share personal details with her coworkers. Actual law enforcement would laugh at him if he tried to report someone for the crime of being antisocial. I can handle my own security investigations, Webb said defensively. I don't need to involve outside agencies for every little suspicion. Elena could see that several employees were now actively taking notes or recording video of the conversation. Webb's mention of foreign agents and corporate espionage had caught everyone's attention, and people were beginning to realize that this wasn't just workplace bullying anymore. I'm sure you're very thorough, Elena said diplomatically. But if there really are security threats, wouldn't it be better to have help from people with more experience in counterintelligence? The question was designed to probe whether Webb actually knew anything about real security threats, or if he was just throwing around dramatic accusations to justify his harassment. Elena was also curious to see how he would react to the implication that his expertise might be insufficient for handling serious threats. Webb's face reddened again. But this time, Elena could see that his anger was mixed with something else. Fear, maybe, or guilt. His reaction suggested that there might be more to his suspicions than simple paranoia. "I have plenty of experience," Webb said, but his voice was defensive rather than confident. 12 years in the Marine Corps, 3 deployments overseas, specialized training in force protection and counterintelligence. Elena filed this information away for later analysis. If Webb really had counterintelligence training, then his suspicions about her might be based on actual observations rather than random paranoia. She needed to be extremely careful about how she handled the rest of this conversation. "That's very impressive," Elena said, and she meant it. Real counterintelligence training would make Webb a much more dangerous opponent than she had initially assumed. With that kind of background, you must see things that other people miss. The compliment seemed to catch Webb off guard, and for a moment his aggressive posture softened slightly. Elena could see that, despite his abrasive personality, he craved recognition for his expertise and experience. "Most people don't appreciate the complexity of real security work," Webb said, his tone becoming slightly less hostile. "They think it's all about checking ID badges and monitoring cameras. But real threats are much more subtle." Elena nodded encouragingly, hoping to keep Webb talking about his security concerns. If he really had identified legitimate security threats, she needed to know about them. And if his suspicions were focused on her, she needed to understand exactly what had triggered them. "What kind of subtle threats should people be watching for?" Elena asked, maintaining the curious tone of someone who was genuinely interested in learning about security procedures. Webb seemed to realize that he was sharing more information than he had intended, because his suspicious expression returned. "Nice try," he said, "but I'm not going to discuss specific security protocols with someone who might be a threat herself." Elena forced herself to look hurt by the accusation. "I'm not a threat to anyone. She said quietly. "I just fix computers and answer help desk tickets. I don't even have access to any classified information." That's what you want people to think," Webb said, his paranoia returning full force. "But IT support has access to everyone's computers. You could be installing monitoring software, copying files, documenting security procedures. The perfect position for someone who wanted to gather intelligence without attracting attention." Elena had to admit that Webb's analysis wasn't entirely wrong. IT support personnel did have broad access to computer systems, and they would be in an excellent position to gather intelligence if they were so inclined. The problem was that he was applying this logic to her specifically without any evidence that she was actually engaged in suspicious activities. But then Elena realized something that made her blood run cold. Webb wasn't just making random accusations based on paranoia. He was describing her actual mission with uncomfortable accuracy. The only way he could know to look for those specific activities was if he had some reason to suspect that corporate espionage was actually happening at Blackwater Defense. Elena's mind raced as she considered the implications. Either Webb was involved in the security breach himself and was trying to deflect suspicion onto her, or he had identified the same security threats that had brought Elena here in the first place. In either case, this confrontation had just become much more serious than a simple case of workplace bullying. She needed to gather more intelligence about what Webb knew and how he knew it. But she also needed to be extremely careful not to reveal anything that would confirm his suspicions about her. "I understand why IT access could be a security concern," Elena said carefully. "Are there specific procedures I should follow to make sure I don't accidentally create security risks? I want to make sure I'm doing everything properly." Ender. Webb studied her face intently, clearly trying to determine whether her question was genuine or if she was fishing for information about security protocols. Elena maintained the earnest, slightly worried expression of someone who was concerned about doing her job correctly. "The procedures are classified," Webb said finally. "But I'll be watching to make sure you follow them whether you know what they are or not." Elena nodded as if this made perfect sense, while mentally noting that Webb had just admitted to conducting ongoing surveillance of her activities. This confirmed that his suspicions were serious and focused, not just random harassment. The question now was whether Webb was surveillance her because he suspected she was a threat, or because he was trying to make sure she didn't discover his own illegal activities. Elena needed to find a way to determine which scenario was correct without revealing her true purpose at Blackwater Defense. Around the mess hall, the tension had reached a breaking point. Employees were no longer even pretending to eat their breakfast. And Elena could see that several people had quietly left, probably to report the incident to management or security. Webb seemed to realize that the confrontation had attracted far more attention than he had intended, because he glanced around nervously at all the phones that were still recording the conversation. "This isn't over," he said to Elena, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. "I'll be keeping a very close eye on you. Sarah Martinez, from IT. And if I find out you're not who you claim to be, you'll wish you had never heard of Blackwater Defense." With that threat, Webb turned and stalked out of the mess hall, his 3 companions following behind him like confused puppies. Elena remained standing beside her table, watching them leave while maintaining the slightly shocked expression of someone who had just been threatened by a workplace bully. But inside, Elena's mind was working furiously. Webb's parting words had contained a very specific threat about her identity, which suggested that his investigation had uncovered something that made him doubt she was really Sarah Martinez from IT. Elena needed to find out exactly what Webb knew, how he had learned it, and whether he was working alone or as part of a larger conspiracy. But first, she needed to deal with the immediate aftermath of this very public confrontation. As Webb disappeared through the mess hall entrance, Elena slowly sank back into her chair and buried her face in her hands, as if she was overwhelmed by what had just happened. It was a perfectly natural reaction for someone who had just been publicly humiliated and threatened, and it allowed her to hide her expression while she processed everything she had learned. The mission had just become infinitely more complicated. Elena had come to Blackwater Defense to identify a security leak, but now she had discovered that the head of physical security was conducting unauthorized investigations of employees and making threats based on classified information. Either Webb was the leak she had been sent to find, or there was an even more complex conspiracy at work than anyone had realized. Elena knew that everything had changed in the past 10 minutes, and she would need to completely reassess her strategy for completing this mission. But first, she needed to get out of the mess hall before anyone decided to approach her with sympathy or questions that she wasn't prepared to answer. Elena kept her head down for several long minutes, allowing the shocked silence in the mess hall to gradually give way to whispered conversations and the normal sounds of people finishing their breakfast. When she finally looked up, she found herself surrounded by concerned faces and sympathetic expressions. "Are you okay?" asked Dr. Jennifer Chen, a senior engineer from the Advanced Systems Division, who Elena had been quietly observing for weeks. That was completely out of line. Webb had no right to harass you like that. Elena nodded weakly, playing the role of someone who was still shaken by the confrontation. "I don't understand what I did wrong," she said softly. "I've been trying so hard to do a good job and fit in here." "You didn't do anything wrong," said another voice. Elena looked up to see David Rodriguez, the senior engineer who had been recording the confrontation on his phone. "Webb's been looking for an excuse to flex his authority, and he picked on you because he thought you wouldn't fight back. I recorded the whole thing," Rodriguez continued. "I'm going to make sure HR sees exactly what happened here. This kind of behavior is completely unacceptable." Elena felt a mixture of gratitude and concern about the recording. On one hand, having video evidence of Webb's aggressive behavior would help establish her as the innocent victim in this situation. On the other hand, she needed to make sure that her own responses during the confrontation wouldn't reveal anything suspicious to anyone who analyzed the footage carefully. "Thank you," Elena said to Rodriguez. "I was so shocked. that I didn't even think to document what was happening. I just wanted it to stop. Dr. Chen sat down across from Elena, her expression serious but kind. Listen, Sarah. I don't know you very well, because you keep to yourself. But what just happened was harassment. Pure and simple. You have every right to file a formal complaint about Webb's behavior. Elena considered this suggestion carefully. Filing a complaint against Webb would be the natural response for Sarah Martinez from IT. And it might also give her access to information about Webb's background and any previous incidents involving his conduct. But it would also draw official attention to her, which could be dangerous if Webb really had discovered something suspicious about her identity. I don't know, Elena said hesitantly. Webb seems to have a lot of authority here, and he said he outranks my supervisor. What if filing a complaint just makes things worse for me? He doesn't outrank everyone, Rodriguez said firmly. And harassment is harassment, regardless of someone's position in the security department. You have rights as an employee, and the company has policies against this kind of behavior. Elena nodded, but continued to look uncertain. It's just that he seemed so convinced that I was hiding something or doing something wrong. What if there's something about my background check that raised red flags? What if I get investigated and lose my job? The concern was perfectly reasonable for someone in Sarah Martinez's position, but Elena was also fishing for information about what kind of background investigations were normal at Blackwater Defense. If Webb had been conducting unauthorized surveillance, it would help to know what legitimate security procedures looked like by comparison. Dr. Chen exchanged a look with Rodriguez before answering. Background checks for IT positions are pretty standard, she said carefully. They verify your education, employment history, and run a criminal background check. Unless you lied on your application or have a criminal record you didn't disclose, there shouldn't be any problems. Elena filed this information away, noting that Dr. Chen seemed to know quite a bit about the company's hiring procedures. This could be valuable intelligence, since Chen worked in advanced systems and would likely have higher security clearance than most employees. I didn't lie about anything, Elena said, which was technically true, since she hadn't filled out the application herself. But Webb mentioned social media and said he couldn't find much information about me online. Is that really something they check? Rodriguez frowned. Not usually, unless you're applying for a position that requires top-secret clearance. For IT support, they might look at your public social media to make sure you're not posting anything inappropriate, but they wouldn't expect to find a detailed online presence. Exactly, Dr. Chen agreed. Plenty of people prefer to keep a low online profile for privacy reasons. The fact that you don't post personal information on social media should be seen as a positive thing, not a red flag. Elena was beginning to get a clearer picture of what had triggered Webb's suspicions. Her cover identity had been designed to pass official background checks, but it apparently lacked the kind of casual digital footprint that most people her age would have accumulated naturally. To someone with counterintelligence training, this absence of data might look suspicious. Webb also said something about foreign agents and corporate espionage, Elena said, lowering her voice as if she was worried about being overheard. Is that really a concern here? I thought we just did software development and technical support. Dr. Chen and Rodriguez exchanged another look, and Elena could see them both hesitating before answering. This reaction told her immediately that corporate espionage was indeed a legitimate concern at Blackwater Defense, and that these employees knew more about it than they were comfortable discussing. Blackwater has some government contracts that involve sensitive information, Dr. Chen said finally. So yes, industrial espionage is always a potential threat, but that doesn't give Webb the right to harass employees based on paranoid suspicions. Elena nodded thoughtfully, filing away the confirmation that Blackwater was handling sensitive government work. This explained why her agency had been called in to investigate the security breach. And it also explained why Webb might be conducting background investigations of his own. Should I be worried? Elena asked. I mean, if there really are security threats, maybe Webb was just doing his job when he questioned me. Questioning you is one thing, Rodriguez said firmly. But what Webb did crossed the line into harassment and intimidation. Even if he had legitimate security concerns, there are proper procedures for investigating them. You don't corner someone in the mess hall and threaten them in front of half the company. Dr. Chen nodded in agreement. If Webb had real concerns about your background, he should have discussed them privately with HR and your supervisor. Making a public scene like that suggests he was more interested in intimidating you than in conducting a legitimate security investigation. Elena appreciated this insight into how security investigations were supposed to be conducted at Blackwater Defense. It confirmed her suspicion that Webb's behavior was not part of any official security protocol. "What do you think I should do?" Elena asked, looking between the two engineers with the expression of someone who genuinely needed advice. "File the complaint," Rodriguez said without hesitation. HR needs to know what happened, and Webb needs to face consequences for his behavior. If you don't report it, he'll probably just pick another target. "I agree," Dr. Chen said, "and I'll back you up if you need witnesses." Several people saw what happened, and I'm sure others would be willing to support your complaint. Elena felt a surge of genuine gratitude toward these two people who were offering to help her despite barely knowing her. It reminded her that even in the morally complex world of intelligence work, there were still people who were willing to stand up for what was right. "Thank you," Elena said sincerely. "Both of you. I was feeling pretty alone after that confrontation, and it means a lot to know that people saw what really happened." "You're not alone, Doctor," Chen assured her. "And don't let Webb make you think you've done anything wrong by keeping to yourself. Some people are just more private than others, and that's perfectly normal." Elena was about to respond when she noticed a commotion near the entrance to the mess hall. A woman in an expensive business suit was speaking urgently to one of the food service managers, and Elena could see the manager pointing in their direction. Oh," Rodriguez muttered, following Elena's gaze. "That's Margaret Hoffman from HR. Someone must have reported what happened." Elena felt a spike of anxiety that was only partly related to her cover identity. Margaret Hoffman was on her list of potential suspects in the security breach, since HR personnel had access to personnel files and background check information that could be valuable to foreign agents. "Miss Martinez?" Hoffman called out as she approached their table. "I'm Margaret Hoffman from Human Resources. I understand there was an incident involving you and Marcus Webb this morning?" Elena nodded nervously, staying in character as someone who was intimidated by having HR's attention. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Webb seemed upset about something, but I'm not sure what I did wrong." Hoffman's expression softened slightly. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said firmly. "But I need to get your version of what happened, so we can address this situation properly. Would you be willing to come to my office and discuss the incident?" Elena glanced at Dr. Chen and Rodriguez, as if seeking their advice. Both engineers nodded encouragingly. "I think that's a good idea," Dr. Chen said. "Make sure you tell them exactly what Webb said and how he behaved. And mention that several people recorded the incident," Rodriguez added. "Miss Hoffman should see the video evidence." Hoffman nodded approvingly. "Video evidence would be very helpful," she said. "Mr. Rodriguez, would you be willing to provide a copy of your recording?" "Absolutely," Rodriguez said. "I'll email it to you this afternoon." Elena stood up slowly, gathering her tablet and the remains of her breakfast. "Should I bring anything specific to our meeting?" she asked Hoffman. "Just yourself and an honest account of what happened," Hoffman replied. "This is a preliminary discussion to establish the facts. Depending on what we learn, there may be additional steps. But for now, I just need to understand exactly what occurred." Elena followed Hoffman out of the mess hall, acutely aware that dozens of eyes were tracking their movement. The incident with Webb had definitely blown her cover of anonymity. But it might also provide her with valuable opportunities to gather intelligence about the company's security procedures and personnel. As they walked through the corridors toward the HR offices, Elena's mind was already working on how to handle the upcoming interview. She needed to maintain her cover as Sarah Martinez, while also gathering as much information as possible about Webb, Hoffman, and anyone else who might be involved in the security breach. The conversation with Hoffman would be crucial. Elena needed to appear cooperative and innocent, while also probing for information about security policies, background check procedures, and any other incidents involving Webb's behavior. But Elena also couldn't shake the feeling that this interview was going to reveal more about the true nature of the threat at Blackwater Defense than she was prepared for. Webb's accusations had been too specific and too accurate to be based on random paranoia. Someone at this company knew that there were infiltrators among the employees. The question was whether that someone was trying to expose the infiltrators or protect them. Hoffman led Elena through a maze of corridors to a small conference room adjacent to the HR offices. The room was sterile and windowless, with a round table surrounded by 6 chairs and a whiteboard that showed the faint traces of previous meetings. "Please, have a seat wherever you're comfortable," Hoffman said, closing the door behind them. "Can I get you some water or coffee? I know this morning has been stressful for you." Elena chose a chair that gave her a clear view of both the door and Hoffman's face. "Water would be nice, thank you," she said. "I'm still a little shaken up by what happened." Hoffman retrieved a bottle of water from a small refrigerator in the corner and placed it in front of Elena before taking a seat across from her. "Let's start from the beginning," she said, pulling out a tablet and stylus. "Tell me exactly what happened this morning. From your perspective." Elena took a sip of water and organized her thoughts. This was her opportunity to establish the official record of what had occurred, and she needed to be careful to present herself as an innocent victim while also gathering intelligence about Hoffman's knowledge of security issues. "I was having breakfast at my usual table," Elena began, when Mr. Webb approached with 3 other security guards. He started questioning me about why I eat alone, and suggesting that my behavior was antisocial or suspicious. Elena provided a detailed account of the confrontation, carefully emphasizing Webb's aggressive behavior and unreasonable demands while downplaying her own tactical awareness and calculated responses. She portrayed herself as confused and frightened by Webb's accusations, but also as someone who had tried to respond appropriately to what seemed like legitimate security concerns. Hoffman took notes throughout Elena's account, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting more details about specific statements Webb had made. Elena noticed that Hoffman seemed particularly interested in Webb's claims about conducting background investigations and his references to foreign agents and corporate espionage. "Did Mr. Webb give you any indication of why he suspected you specifically of security violations?" Hoffman asked, when Elena finished her account. Elena shook her head. "He mentioned that I don't socialize with other employees and that he couldn't find much about me on social media. He seemed to think that keeping a low online profile was somehow suspicious." Hoffman frowned. "That's concerning. Employees have every right to maintain their privacy, and social media activity is not part of our standard security evaluations for IT positions." Elena seized the opportunity to probe for more information. "Mr. Webb also mentioned that he had been investigating my background for some time. Is that normal? Should I be worried that there's something in my personnel file that's causing problems?" "No, you should not be worried," Hoffman said firmly. "You passed all required background checks when you were hired, and there have been no red flags in your performance reviews or security evaluations. Mr. Webb appears to have been conducting unauthorized surveillance, which is a serious violation of company policy." Elena felt a mixture of relief and concern. Relief that her cover identity was still intact, and concern that Webb's unauthorized surveillance might have uncovered something that official channels had missed. "I'm glad to hear that," Elena said. "But I have to ask, if there really are security threats at the company, shouldn't someone be investigating suspicious behavior? Maybe Mr. Webb was just being thorough. Actually, our major..." Hoffman studied Elena's face carefully before responding. "There are proper procedures for security investigations," she said slowly. "They involve coordination between multiple departments and oversight from senior management." "What, Mr. Ard? Unformant? All Sard." Webb did this morning was not part of any authorized security protocol. Elena nodded, but pressed for more information. It's just that he seemed so certain that there were real threats. He specifically mentioned foreign agents and corporate espionage. Should employees be concerned about those kinds of risks? All defense contractors face potential security threats, Hoffman acknowledged. But we have comprehensive security measures in place to address those risks. Employees should focus on following established security protocols, not conducting their own amateur investigations. Elena could see that Hoffman was being careful not to reveal too much about specific security concerns. But her defensive tone suggested that there were indeed legitimate threats that the company was dealing with. I understand, Elena said. I just want to make sure I'm not inadvertently doing anything that could create security problems. Are there specific guidelines I should follow to make sure my behavior doesn't raise any red flags? Hoffman smiled for the first time since they had sat down. Just continue doing exactly what you've been doing, she said. Your performance has been excellent. You follow all security procedures, and you maintain appropriate professional boundaries. The fact that you prefer privacy and quiet work environments is not a security concern. Elena felt genuinely touched by the reassurance, even though she knew it was based on a completely false understanding of who she really was. Thank you, Elena said. That means a lot. I was starting to worry that maybe I don't fit in here. You fit in just fine, Hoffman assured her. And we're going to make sure that Mr. Webb understands that his behavior this morning was completely unacceptable. Elena sensed that the interview was winding down, and she wanted to gather as much additional intelligence as possible before it ended. Will there be an investigation into Mr. Webb's conduct? Elena asked. I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble, but I'm worried that he might target other employees if this kind of behavior isn't addressed. There will definitely be an investigation, Hoffman confirmed. And depending on what we discover, there may be serious consequences for Mr. Webb. Harassment and unauthorized surveillance are both violations that we take very seriously. Elena nodded, then hesitated, as if she was uncertain about raising another concern. Webb mentioned that he has counterintelligence training from his military service. If he really believes there are security threats, is it possible that he knows something that other people don't? Am known. Hoffman's expression became very serious. That's an interesting question, she said slowly. But even if Mr. Webb has legitimate security concerns, there are proper channels for reporting and investigating them. Taking unauthorized action based on personal suspicions is not acceptable, regardless of someone's background or training. Elena could see that her question had struck a nerve. Hoffman was clearly concerned about the possibility that Webb might have access to information that wasn't being shared through proper channels. I understand, Elena said. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something important. You're not missing anything, Hoffman said firmly. Your job is to provide its support, not to worry about counterintelligence operations. The choice of words was interesting. Hoffman had said counterintelligence operations, not security concerns or threat assessments. This suggested that there were indeed active counterintelligence efforts underway at Blackwater. Defense. Elena had learned more in this single interview than she had gathered in 3 months of careful observation. The security breach she had been sent to investigate was apparently part of a larger pattern of security threats that had the company's leadership genuinely concerned. The question now was whether Webb was trying to expose those threats or was part of them himself. Hoffman closed her tablet and stood up, signaling that the interview was over. Thank you for being so cooperative, Sarah. I know this has been a difficult morning for you. Elena gathered her things and stood as well. Thank you for taking this seriously, she said. I feel much better knowing that the company has proper procedures for handling these situations. As Elena walked back toward her workspace, her mind was already processing everything she had learned. The confrontation with Webb had blown her cover of anonymity, but it had also provided her with valuable intelligence about the security situation at Blackwater Defense. Elena now knew that there were active counterintelligence operations underway, that unauthorized surveillance was a known problem, and that the head of physical security was either incompetent or corrupt. She also knew that Margaret Hoffman from HR was more knowledgeable about security issues than her job title would suggest, and that Dr. Chen and David Rodriguez had access to information about sensitive government contracts. Most importantly, Elena now had official support for investigating Webb's activities under the guise of cooperating with HR's investigation into his misconduct. The mission had taken an unexpected turn, but Elena was beginning to see opportunities that hadn't existed when she was just the quiet girl from IT who nobody noticed. Sometimes the best way to catch a spy was to let them think they had caught you first. Elena returned to her workstation with a slight smile on her face. Webb had no idea what he had gotten himself into when he decided to corner the quiet girl in the mess hall, but he was about to find out.